especially used to selling commodity on the shelf, AV stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because I was going to say this, I mean, you do more of a network fixed devices, don't you?
Yeah. They do desktops too. Surprised at the turnout for the last day of the conference and to the last day.
Mm-hmm. It is.
4 o'clock.
Yeah. Usually the last day you're ready to let me get a little jump on everything if they're driving, maybe check the traffic.
When are you going home?
I'm driving tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm up in PA. So
Oh, that's right. I'm flying to a 7 o'clock flight tonight back to Atlanta.
I was just down from Chief first.
Are you there? Yeah, I'm there. Okay. Well,
Had an awful infection that week. Oh.
I thought I put a global entry card and it even helps the rest of it. Have you done that yet?
Okay, let's
I guarantee you I check over time.
start with one person, but he was on the last panel, so hopefully he'll emerge shortly. So the last panel was really about the concept of the consortium, why it came together, and why the stakeholders have decided to spend time and, in some cases, money on the consortium. And we started to touch on some of the technical issues, so I tried to back us off a little bit. And in this panel, what we really want to do is get into some of the interesting technical issues that we've been working on and touching on. And one of the things we talked about in the last panel was how do you find whether or not, how do you discover and identify whether or not a device is effective? So one of the things is how do you know what in epidemiology, we say what's the case definition? So it's interesting, the parallels between the silicone-based world and the carbon-based world, silicone being computers, carbon-based being us, and the notion that malware or infection is remarkably similar. I would almost go so far as to say it's the same. And what's interesting is that they're saying in a parallel way, but what's happened is they've become not only the same in a parallel way, but they've come together so that, again, when I see my slide, what I talk about is silicone-based defects leading to carbon-based disease. So if you're wearing an insulin pump and it is wirelessly connected and it gets infected or hacked, it causes disease. If you have a defibrillator or pacer and it gets a problem, whether it's a software defect that is de novo or whether it's from an external impact, it results in carbon-based disease. The patient gets sick. And so is true with medical devices. And it's obvious for the ones that are touching and are implanted, but it's also true for the ones that work with us at distance. And that's a far further reaching argument, but it's also true. So how do we come up with a case definition for a sick device? And when we do come up with that case definition, I'll give you an example of how it works in medicine. So take a problem like SARS. People probably remember SARS. We set the CDC at the time, and we thought there's a good chance it was going to be a really big global problem, but thankfully it didn't end up one. No one knew what SARS was. It had never been seen before. Right? It was an infection that came from some little capsid in China, got spread by global migration, and people were getting sick with a respiratory illness, but no one knew what it was. We changed the case definition of SARS 13 times at the CDC during that epidemic. Okay. So how do we know someone was infected with SARS and that they were a case? Well, we didn't have a laboratory test for it, so we said, well, if they were in this country, in this city, in this hotel, and they had these symptoms and these laboratory findings, then they had SARS. We had no idea what the virus or the malware was, right? And then that changed 13 times until, guess what happened? We know the story, we isolated the virus, okay, for birthday doing medicine. Right? So a sick device, a device that has malware, might be a device that acts a certain way, like a medical device or a VA system that calls to Ukraine is not a normal device, right? It's not phoned at home. So they say, okay, that device is infected. One way to define it. So we're going to have discussions around how do we define infections, how do we discover infections, what kind of technology engines are out there to help us, figure that out. And then the issue is, if your device is defected or vulnerable, how do you find those vulnerabilities? So what technologies are out there to find vulnerabilities? And what happens if the discovery of vulnerabilities is something that's done in a way that bad people and good people both use? Giving away the punchline a little bit, but that's in fact truly the case. We're going to have a demonstration around that technology. Then we're going to talk about ways that we can use technologies to mitigate risk from the chip level. And then we've got grant makers in the VA who can help us understand from a policy perspective how all of this kind of impacts the way we do planning in the healthcare system. Are you ready to do that? Almost. So maybe, are you ready? Just a smidge. Okay. So let's start out with a little demo. And so let's say that we wanted to hack into a device, right? I'm not steal Jonathan's thunder. So Jonathan, why don't you have a couple slides to introduce? Okay, why don't you introduce yourself? You have to pay a lot of money for some slides up there. No, so just introduce yourself briefly, and then he's going to go into a demo about a tool, with a tool that helps do some interesting things.
So thanks, Dale. My name is Jonathan Knutson. I'm from Cognomicon. We make a software test tool. So in terms of medical devices, we think of software and firmware as interchangeable. So when I say software, I'm talking about anything, any code like what runs on a glucose meter or an infusion pump or even an app that runs on an iPhone or an iPad, or the software that runs a large system like some sort of imaging system, anything like that. When I say software, it's pretty all-encompassing. And in terms of patient safety and the security of these systems, we talk in terms of software bugs. So software has bugs, bad things could happen either unintentionally or intentionally. So this title of the talk is Fuzz Happens and What You Can Do About It. Do I have a clicker up here?
There should be one up there.
Cool. Great. And I will keep it small because it is a down discussion, and I don't want to soak up all the time. And plus, I don't know about you guys, but this time of day, I want to have a snack. And after I have a snack, I want to go to sleep. So I will try to keep it brief and interesting. So we'll start out, I'm going to talk about fuzzing. It's probably a term that you haven't heard of, or if you have heard of it, not in this context.
So we have actually technology that we can answer that question. How many people have heard fuzzing? One.
imaging system or anything else. And in an ideal world, in a world with unicorns, these are the only people who care about fuzzing. The people that write the software, do the fuzzing, find the bugs, and fix them, and then release their products to the world. However, it is not a world with unicorns, and so there are other people that are also interested in fuzzing. So buyers in the medical world, these would be HDOs mainly. People who buy the equipment from the manufacturers are also interested in fuzzing because ultimately it's the HDO that has responsibility for the patient's health. And so the equipment that they're buying, they can do fuzz testing on it to see if it has bugs or vulnerabilities. And then, of course, there's the whole supply chain, integrators who buy bits of software from different people might want to do fuzzing in order to verify that the software they're getting is safe. How does fuzzing work? It's actually pretty simple. So software takes input and does something with it. So the software in an infusion pump, you say, set the rate to this. That's the input to it, and it makes the pump happen that way. So fuzzing is you send weird, malformed, or unexpected inputs to the software and see if it survives, see what happens. You smack it upside the head and see if it's okay after that. And the whole idea is you're trying to find those problems. Let's say you as the equipment manufacturer, you as the author of the software, you're trying to find problems and fix them before you let the thing out the door into the real world. For those of you familiar with software development, this is a different kind of software testing. So traditional software testing is positive testing, or sometimes called conformance testing, where you give good inputs to your software, expected inputs, stuff you're expecting your software to see, and you make sure that the right thing happens. And that's great. You have to do that. But complementary to that is fuzz testing or negative testing, where you're sending malformed inputs to the software, unexpected things, and making sure that it doesn't fail. So in terms of nuts and bolts, here is an example.
John, any questions so far?
So that either means they're all lost or it was perfect.
We didn't have any snacks that were sitting down.
That's right. So in terms of nuts and bolts, here is an example. This is how a browser talks to a server to get a web page for you. So the browser sends a message to the server using a message in HTTP, which is a protocol, and the browser says, excuse me, server, please give me this page. And the top part, that's what it looks like when it's a normal request to the server. If we wanted to fuzz test that server, if we wanted to give it something malformed or unexpected, we would do something like the bottom part, where we've taken one of the fields, the slash in the first line here, and we just replaced it with a kind of an odd value here. And you can imagine how we could create thousands, tens of thousands of test cases just like this, where we just keep picking different weird values for this one field. And then you can imagine we could create tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of test cases where we're putting in weird values for the different fields in this message. And that's basically how fuzzing works. You look at how you're supposed to talk to a computer system, how you're supposed to give it input, and then you systematically break the rules.
The concept being that once you put a device in an environment, a live environment, and it's in the middle of a system of systems that construction can use, to think that it's going to get the perfect input all the time, it's just not likely. So the concept here is to test the robustness of it. You're not going to get every single possible bad input, but with enough combinations in enough places, hopefully you would identify a weak device if it was in fact weak.
Right, so there are really two aspects. The one is robustness. You put it out in the real world, and strange things always happen in the real world. And so by making strange things happen in your development cycle and fixing them, you're
hardening your software against the real world. But the other aspect is security. So if an attacker wishes to take control of a piece of software, they will also use this technique of sending malformed inputs to it to see if there's a vulnerability there. So if you, as a software producer, as a builder, do this in your software development lifecycle, you're going to make the attacker's job much harder. This is the fundamental premise of fuzz testing. Again, from the builder perspective, from the manufacturer perspective, is on the left here, this tall rectangle, those are the bugs in your code when you write your code. And you do this in-house testing, positive testing or conformance testing, and then as you work through the release cycle in the middle, you fix that cloud of stuff that you found, that cloud of bugs. And so your released product looks like this, and you've left a bunch of bugs there because you didn't do any negative testing. So real-world conditions or attackers will send unexpected inputs to your software, and it will be easy to find bugs or vulnerabilities. So if you do your own fuzzing in-house, you're also going to find that cloud of bugs and fix them through the release cycle. And so your software is going to be more robust and more secure when it gets to the real world. So I go and I teach people about fuzz testing, and they always say, what's my ROI? And this is more from the business world. I mean, I think in healthcare it's a little clearer, but in the business world they always say, well, if I'm going to invest in fuzz testing tools and I'm going to make my QA teams do this thing, what's my return on investment? And there are two ways of looking at it. So this is part one, and this is the one, this is for the bean counters. This is easy to quantify, it's easy to understand. It just costs less to fix a bug sooner rather than later. So if you got your development team here and the QA team here, and the QA team finds bugs, they just kick them back to the development team, and it's relatively low cost to fix. If bugs get all the way to the outside world and found, and you have to go all the way back to the development team and fix them, the cost is much larger. So that's quantifiable. You can figure out how many bugs you're going to find. You can estimate how many bugs you're going to find. We commissioned a study where we looked at a network equipment manufacturer, and based on the number of bugs they found over 3 years and comparing the costs of fixing them in-house rather than out, they figured out they saved a big pile of money. So that's great. Part two is like those MasterCard commercials, priceless, okay? It's harder to quantify, but it's more important. And this is always easy to explain to a healthcare audience, right? Obviously, software bugs, now if I'm being correct, I would say can lead to adverse patient events, which to me says death, but adverse patient events. And so, and even if they don't, a significant failure or a security breach can result in irreparable reputation damage for a company. So this is the part two of ROI. More important, harder to quantify. So the demonstration is, it's an off-the-shelf Android device. It's my old phone before I got a better one. It's Android 2.2. Nothing really special about it. I would like to pretend that, let's say it's a continuous glucose meter or something like that. And the way we're going to break it is with Bluetooth, which I know is becoming very popular among small medical devices.
So, interject that in today's world, it's possible for someone to create an app that would require regulation. So FDA doesn't regulate generic use devices. So they won't regulate an iPad or an Android tablet or a smartphone. But they would regulate it if you put software on it that rendered it a medical device. So then they'd be regulating the software. So you don't have to pretend that that's not that specific phone with a certain configuration, certain software installed on it, in fact, could be a medical device. And nothing would change with respect to the Bluetooth piece of it.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that what we're actually attacking here is the Android platform, which has nothing to do with the app that's running on top of it. So what I'm going to show you here is we're fuzzing Bluetooth. So we're sending malformed Bluetooth packets from my test tool on my laptop to the phone. The reason I have it plugged in via cable is because with Android phones, we can actually see the output of the phone in this window here. And I know it looks like a lot of gobbledygook, but it's okay. We don't really need the edges. But the reason is so that as we're doing this fuzz testing, you can see the kinds of messages that Android's spitting out. It'll say, oh, I didn't recognize that value, or, oh, this thing was too long. And that's very typical because we are sending malformed inputs to the phone. So I want to show you both that we can break it and also how easy it is to break it. So what we've got here, this is a fuzz test tool that my company makes called Defensix. And all we're going to do, I've got this Bluetooth, the L2CAP protocol tool running. And all we're going to do is open up a scanner and look around and see what Bluetooth devices we can find. So I have to make this one discoverable. We'll see if we pick up anything from the audience.
Have been more fun.
All right, so it looks like we got a cautious crowd. Oh, there's somebody. But anyway, so my phone here is the LG right here. So I'm just going to select it and say OK. And at this point, I've aimed the test tool at the phone. I've filled in this address of the phone, and that's really all I had to do to configure the tool. The next thing that we're going to do, and this is typical for fuzz testing, is I'm going to try to have a good conversation with the phone before I try to kill it. And so I'm going to send a variety of good inputs to the phone in this protocol and look for replies. And so you can see the things lit up green, which means, yes, we're good. I was able to talk to it. And then it turns out there are some features of Bluetooth that my phone doesn't support, and those are the yellow and red. So we're only going to, the good news is we've been able to have a good conversation. So at this point, we're ready to start sending the bad stuff. And this is the only part of the demo where I'm going to cheat, and it's only to save time. So instead of starting from test case number 1, I know that there's a failure, so I'm going to start partway through this test run. And just so you know, this particular test suite, I have 9,400 test cases. And that's actually kind of low. So depending on
test cases means
each
94, 67 different types
bad
of
inputs.
Input. And how do you decide, where does your bad input idea come from? How do you decide on those 9,467 bad inputs versus my bad inputs?
So I left that part of the talk out because it takes a long time. But briefly, the trick of a good fuzz tool, you can make up an infinite number of bad inputs. You can do this all day long. And the trick of a good fuzz tool is that you're trying to pick inputs that look almost like real messages but are not quite. And so this tool is good at that. So I'm going to start up here. And just to make things more interesting, I'm going to open a Bluetooth connection between my phone and my computer. So imagine, if you will, that the phone is my glucose meter and the computer's my insulin pump. Okay? So we're going to open up an existing communication. And the way I'm going to do that is just to play music from the phone to the computer. And then I'm going to unmute the computer so we can hear it. Okay. So the song is Everything is Broken. And now, with that in place, I'm going to kick off the test run. And what I want to show you is...
So this is the sound of our central nervous system before we go into a...
That's right.
Coma.
Exactly. In the test tool, we've got this little heartbeat monitor, which basically every time you get a blip, it means we've sent a test case, we've sent a bad input to the target. And then over here, remember, this is the output of the phone. So as we're sending these test cases, the phone is saying, ouch, ouch, I didn't like that, but it's surviving, which is fine. That's good behavior. But if we wait just a little bit longer here, we should see a catastrophic failure. Oh, I'm on the wrong numbers. It's up around 5117, I think. So we'll get there. Any questions in the meantime?
How long will it take?
Sorry?
How long will it take to read that number?
There it is. So we sent an input from our test tool to the Android. We killed Android's Bluetooth process. My phone is still running, but of course the existing connection to the insulin pump has been broken. And it's not like I needed special access to the glucose meter to do this. All I had to do was find out its address, and that's all I needed. So I guess two takeaways, and the one is it's really easy to break something, and the second one is using this technique at a device manufacturer level will enable you to find and fix vulnerabilities to make devices safer and more secure.
So I'm a healthcare system. Do I take your tool and start marching around my hospital, fuzz testing the video accelerator or the
So,
devices?
so Dale knows the answer to this question, but he's asking it because it tends to be a destructive kind of testing, and so doing this kind of testing can make a device inoperable. So number one, never, ever, ever run this on production devices or devices that are involved in patient care. And number two is you really don't want to run it on a device that will ever be used in the future for patient care unless you are absolutely sure that you can reset it to a factory state.
Any questions?
Yeah.
This may be a general question for the panel later on, I don't know, but it seems pretty obvious even now. If I'm into some software for chronic care monitoring, and I look for devices to interact with the physiological sensor data, how can I reassure myself that the device that I'm willing to work with meets the highest quality of testing, pre-release testing? There are levels of fuzzing that I should look for, and how do I categorize those levels?
Right, and that's a problem we've been wrestling with. So we do a lot of work in the telecommunications industry, and it's sort of a similar problem. What you want is Energy Star for fuzz testing. Like, oh, I can get this product, and it's got a fuzz star rating of whatever, and that makes me feel good. And unfortunately, right now, there is not an existing standard. And it's a difficult problem because we talked about before, you can make an infinite number of fuzz test cases of bad inputs. And so if you do 100,000 test cases with a bad fuzzer, it's much less effective than 100,000 test cases with a good fuzzer. So it's hard to build criteria for how much and what kind of fuzzing is good.
And this is one particular type of test to look at how to harden the software. There are other things that I'm sure manufacturers do in their typical manufacturing cycle. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, but there's other things they do. Was your question specifically around what fuzz tester to buy, or was it more around just generically how do you know?
I'm just going, how can I reassure my customers that I've got the highest level of testing that's been done, possible,
Right, well,
the device that I'm hooking them up to?
I think the short answer to that is I try to really short answer is I don't know. And I don't know if the FDA has these are regulated devices, so the FDA goes through good manufacturing process, and manufacturers have to comply with that. So I don't know if any of the manufacturers want to make a comment about.
We're talking
Right. You can,
So,
so you're acquiring software and using it in your products, and I'm glad you're concerned because that's a good sign. So the best you could do is say to your suppliers, well, I want you to do fuzz testing, and with these parameters. I want you to do it in a good way. You could try that. They probably won't like it. Or you can do the fuzz testing yourself. On this,
Independent organizations and that could do this as well?
yeah, you can hire this out. Yeah.
so fuzz testing is one piece of it, and so these guys are available to chat. I think you have an interesting question, and the consortium is dealing with that question more globally, and we're dealing with it by coming up with a series of security-related requirements and controls that we think are important. And then one thing would happen would be the manufacturer would say, we have these or we don't, right? So that would be one thing. But the other question is does it make sense from a security or software robustness perspective for a manufacturer to indicate exactly what they do to, if you will, test the hardness of the device? To my knowledge, that is not currently being done. There's no rating system from a security perspective. There's one or two other organizations and consortia like us that we're working with to talk about that. We feel ratings are a little bit premature right now because we're still working through what's necessary.
Yeah, I think it's coming. As a company, Codenomicon's been working on a maturity model for fuzz testing, which would give that kind of a rating, but we haven't done anything externally yet.
I mean, it's also a competitive situation. Let's say you've got 3 different vendors who want its own sensor.
Yeah, it's...
I want to compare them on this parameter as well.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, I'm hijacking this. I want to make sure that we do it broadly. So for example, we just collaborated on writing a white paper because we believe fuzz testing is important. We recommend this group, as an organization, that it get done because you had a nice diagram there, which I didn't see before, with the picture of the bugs free and the picture of doing fuzz. But what was nice is that he showed that it still doesn't get rid of all the bugs. He just gets rid of another subset of them. So we think it's an important tool to apply because it's helpful. But having said that, I think that it's, again, no one's gone out there and come up with a list of requirements, really. There's some high-level stuff that's out there from some of the standards. And so as I said before, I'm not sure here, but we're looking at industrial control standards that have been used, and more people in the healthcare industry are saying, hey, we're really talking about industrial control systems here. And so we're leveraging what work has been done on that, and we're leveraging work that's being done in healthcare, and we're trying to come up with the requirements and then trying to figure out how to come up with different levels, different categories of devices. Because not all devices are going to need the same controls, but that's taking us months. It won't take us years, it'll take us some months. And at the end of that, then hopefully, and what's happening is actually there's a manufacturer disclosure statement. It's not detailed enough yet, but it's a big step towards identifying what features a device has. But short answer is that what you're looking for doesn't exist right now, but it's something that hopefully will emerge.
Coming from classical, I hope, security training, is fuzz testing a subset of vulnerability testing, or are they synonymous?
That's a great question.
Yeah, there's a group called OWASP that has a lot of standards for how to develop secure software, and of course vulnerability testing is a piece of the discipline.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So there is a whole, the question was, there is a whole area of testing called vulnerability assessment, and there are tools for that. MDISS is one tool, right? Okay, and this is not that. This is complementary but different. So MDISS looks for known bad stuff in the same way that antivirus looks for known bad stuff. Intrusion detection systems look for known bad stuff. Here, you're looking for bugs that nobody knows about. And the bad guys are looking for bugs that nobody knows about. They call them 0 days. And the reason they're so dangerous is that antivirus won't protect you. Known vulnerability scanning won't protect you. And so this is complementary to that. You want to do both things. You want to look for the known badness, and you want to look for the unknown badness.
Although I think OWASP does have some tools that do some kind of testing boundary issues.
They might. My impression is they're more focused at the web application layer. Yeah.
Okay, so, quick question, because we have other, we got
Just quickly, very common information, but couldn't your tool be itself be used as a malintent to denial of service attack on this? Absolutely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
why you're interested in buying it?
I keep a close eye on my laptop. Yes, absolutely. So attackers will use fuzz testing. Hopefully they don't have tools that are as good as this, but they will send bad inputs to software to try to crash it in order to either just crash it, denial of service, or in order to inject code to take it over.
That you do all the time.
Yes, that's the standard practice.
That is used to get into the system.
So the whole point is you do it first.
So, really quick.
Can you tell this relates to the PIPS 140 testing? Is that
No, I don't have any familiarity with that. Sorry.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's, Randy Lesson here is from the VA. Why don't you introduce yourself and then you can give us a little.
All right, so Randy Letson, Director of Field Security Service. So what I wanted to talk about at the highest perspective is that our normal policies that we have for a IT device, medical devices are normally either exempt or they can't follow them. So, you know, you talked about the 20% of vulnerabilities can be found with antivirus. Well, a lot of medical devices don't even have, they can't run the agents that we run on our regular IT devices. So they can't run the AV, they can't run HIPS, they can't run any kind of, and you can't scan against them. You can't put agents on them to watch them, like, you know, any kind of products to watch the vulnerabilities and report them. You can't run testing on them like Nessus and all these different scans that we run on all the other IT devices. So from the broader policy, these medical devices are very vulnerable compared to a typical IT device. It's more hardened. So from the highest level, so for our point of view is that that's why we isolate them. Then also we have to write special procedures on how we deal with them compared to how we would deal with a regular IT device. And some of those would be incident identification, I talked about that already, incident reporting, and incident SOPs on how to handle an infected medical device, because I think the one manufacturer said just pull it off the network. Well, no, if there's a patient hooked to it, you're not going to pull it off the network. So IT devices are different. You would pull it off the network. If a user was using it, you would just pull them off, right? They could get another device that's all generic. But a medical device, you will not do that. So my point was that medical devices are much more vulnerable than other devices, and they're also much more, they can't follow the policies, so there's frustration with your normal IT folks for that reason, because they just can't adhere.
Yeah, well, that was just a comment. Maybe. Okay. I'm Mike Taborn, Platform Architect, Intel Corporation. And I guess you know, I guess I wanted to just comment on a couple items here, but yeah, medical devices in general, we don't know what we don't know. Okay, and that's one of the challenges with medical devices. So in other words, there, you know, the vulnerability of the devices, since you can't verify and you can't go in, and interesting enough, and I'm glad, you know, in Kodamakon's case, you know, recommending against a user actually doing this, because you don't know what state. Unless you have the full test plan for the device, the full validation for that device, you can't go and do this testing, for example, and just on the device as a customer, right? Because you could leave it in a state that it appears to be working, but it actually could be failing. But since you don't have the full validation flow, you don't know. Right, so you know, the caution out to that. But I think also from a validation perspective, I think what's interesting here is you've also presented a case of a validation flow that, interesting enough to answer the question, if this wasn't connected, medical device manufacturers are very good at validating what they know, right? I mean, they have been for years. I mean, so not connected to a network, you probably, bar none, probably some of the best validation, you know, implementers in the world. Is when you connect them to the network, and that's what this is adding, is a validation method for when you connect to a network, how to validate that piece of the puzzle, right? And of course there are other things. I think the young lady mentioned there are penetration tests and things of that nature that are out there as well. And to answer your question about using this type of program, yes, the malware, if you notice where malware, I'd actually suggest everyone go out, well, first of all, let me answer the one question. How many people have their drives encrypted? Okay.
Wait, you got to ask the other question.
Oh, how many don't have it encrypted? That's right.
We know about 30% have encrypted,
which is
most people have encrypted your drives. How many of you are running an Apple system using the encryption on that computer? How many
okay.
installed some other encryption software?
Oh, I did. I'm sorry, it's not a computer for Apple.
Okay. Well, I say that because I was actually at one of these conferences before, and I asked that question, and nobody had a lot of device developers, believe it or not, and they didn't have their laptops encrypted. So I just wanted to know the audience. But I think it's just really important to recognize that this is a real problem, and mainly because you're connected now to a network, and now the validation schemes that the device manufacturers have to implement are different than they're familiar with. And so you have tools like this that come out that can help that along. Okay.
So, thanks, Mike. So Jonathan talked about how to find unknown vulnerabilities. It's one tool, an important tool, we think, and there's a similar issue we talked about around the malware issue. So if 20% of malware has an identifiable signature, that means 80% of malware does not have an identifiable signature. In other words, it's not really known. So if you can use fuzz testing to identify unknown vulnerabilities from an input perspective, in just one moment we're going to ask Jeff to talk about how in the malware world there's at least similar approaches in the context of finding unknown agents in this case, or agents without signatures. But Jonathan, just very briefly touch on the notion of you've got a device, it's part of a system of systems, but that input in that device, what happens downstream, potentially?
Right. So if you have a network of devices, let's say you've got, I don't know, a patient in portal or something, and then maybe a couple hops downstream there's a database. If you're fuzzing the patient portal, things might appear to be okay, but you might actually be storing weird stuff in your database that a day later or a week later, when you go to pull it up, something else breaks. So there can be this whole ripple effect.
So it's important to get a fuzz test that you, to the extent possible, fuzz test in the laboratory, and fuzz test is in a constellation that's as close to possible what's happening in your real live network. So in the event that you're pushing these inputs down, in some sort of waterfall fashion from one device to another, that you can identify downstream effects as well as the device itself that you're touching. So, Jeff, can you just introduce yourself briefly and talk about in the world of malware, what you guys have been working on from a technical perspective?
My name is Jeff Michael. I'm a senior global solutions architect for Trend Micro. I spent the last 15 years of my life writing malware, investigating malware, doing ethical hacks on hospitals and different things like that, customizing malware in order to get through their current defenses. And so I'm the nerd on the panel. But kind of as malware has changed, as he was talking about, the latest study shows there's 3 variants of malware being released every 30 seconds. So what I'm seeing globally is there's this gap between the intelligence of the malware and the number of people or the number of tools to investigate it. Sometimes it's almost like trying to be in an ER room using World War I tools. Back in World War I and things like that, if you had an infection, you cut it off. That doesn't really apply in today's day. You don't walk in and say, oh, you got a sore toe, cut it off. We can't use the same methodologies. We can't fight the same cyber war that people were fighting back in the 1960s and the 1970s. People who have that mentality is exactly how the malware is propagating. That's exactly how people like me have broken into hundreds of hospitals and Fortune 100 corporations and things like that, because they're reliant upon old things. So malware is spreading. There's all this malware that's out there. Everybody in here has probably been infected at some point or the other. I kind of call a lot of it commodity malware. I hate the term APT. I'm sure everybody's heard APT. It's been shoved up your nose and out the other side. Most of the threats aren't advanced, they're not persistent, and they're not even targeted. And that's what APT stands for. So when it comes to the medical devices, what we're seeing is we're seeing a trend in the malware becoming much more sophisticated. It's becoming much more targeted at some point, but it's getting in through emails, through USB drives, through all this stuff. Your signature-based systems aren't going to detect that. So several different companies have come out with this live sandboxing technologies. So as this piece of malware comes across your network, you can actually emulate a medical device, because most medical devices are running a Windows operating system or a Linux operating system. So you can actually emulate that medical device at the network level. So it's going to see that particular piece of malware come in. It's going to run it in a sandbox. We call it detonating it. It's going to detonate it. It's going to open it. It's going to see what happens before it gets to that medical device or why it's getting to that medical device.
Now, when that happens, there's no signature-related activity involved with it. You're looking at functional.
Correct. We're looking at heuristics, like how's it from a Windows standpoint, how's it behaving in the register? What kind of callbacks is it doing on the Windows box? Where is it communicating back to? Is this communicating back to China, Russia, Pakistan, wherever? So at that point, because there is no signature for the new stuff coming out. You know, it's kind of like you mentioned when SARS came out, there was no signature for SARS. So majority of the malware right now, there is no signature for. So essentially, you're clicking it, you're detonating it, you're looking at the symptoms. You're looking at the callbacks, you're looking at the registry, you're looking to see if the box died, you're looking to see what happened on that, so that within a matter of minutes, as opposed to weeks, days, months, or years, you can actually develop a pattern for that and then detect it on further medical devices. So that's kind of the next cutting edge with malware and medical devices, is availability to actually sandbox and emulate those devices as live network traffic comes in.
Is there a generic name?
That's one.
Sandboxing.
Yeah.
So just, I want you to go over the different types of engines that
Okay.
are available. But first, who's a nerd on the panel?
Well,
Is there really only one nerd?
I'm going to have to, of course, I'm going to have some other counters that you can do other than this, but yes.
See people fighting over,
Yeah,
you know,
well,
Nerddom.
that's right. I mean, he's probably more than me, I think, just so, because he admitted it.
I didn't want to find anybody of any titles to be reserved.
Do you want to see my pocket protector?
That's right.
So we said multiple nerds on the
That's
panel,
right.
there's not just one nerd.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And now that we've sort of honored everybody, can you just speak to the notion of, the different types of engines that are out there?
I'm the nerd with the least amount of hair. Is that safe?
No, there you
Okay,
go.
good. Follically challenged, I prefer to call. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of things out there to combat malware. Every vendor says that they do malware. Every solution says they do malware, because they all know that y'all have budgets for malware, okay? Some of the basics engines, they start out with the signature-based systems. This is going to be your typical AVs, some of your IPSs, some of the intrusion prevention, some things like that.
Speak in words. For everybody.
Generic signatures. People are going to come in, and generic signatures is the first type. So did it match something I've seen before? Once you move past signatures, there's some have basic engines. I kind of like, the best analogy is somebody delivers a package to Dale's house, okay? Some people say, I got a package delivered. That's something bad. The next phase is kind of heuristics-based engines. They weigh it, they look at it, they see how it's taped, they look at the return envelope, they look at that and say, that's a bad package because it came from China and I hear a ticking sound on the inside. And then the third type of engines is where we actually, the kind that I deal with, is we actually open up the box. We play with the toy. We execute it. We see what happens on the inside. So those are the three steps, from the signature, he got a package delivered, to weighing it and measuring it, which is the heuristics-based step, all the way to the actual sandboxing methodologies, which is opening the package, looking to see what's inside, playing with it, and see if it's valuable.
Where does that piece where you're looking at network traffic come? Is that the heuristic piece where you're saying, oh, there's funny network traffic going on, there's big loads, there's communications to the Ukraine? Where does that fall in?
It has to, believe it or not, when you're doing proper network analysis, you're going to do all three. Because you want to, up front, you can't possibly sandbox every possible executable, every picture of somebody's kids, every Word document, everything that comes to your network. You can't do that. No system can do that. So it has to work left to right. You have to slowly weed things out to where hopefully less than 5% of your traffic is what you're running through the sandbox. So you're starting out, you're comparing it to known lists. Why? Conficker was a big piece of malware that came out a few years ago. Why run that through a sandbox if you already know how it behaves, if you already know what it does, if you already know the symptoms of that? There's no point in running a full body scan against it. So we're going to start out from the left and then go to the right.
Just a kind of a clarification for somebody who's not in this area. So in looking at those three examples that you just mentioned, is there some relationship between kind of heuristics that is like unsupervised versus, and then you're opening up the box, you're actually getting kind of supervised machine learning?
Most of the heuristics is unsupervised. Most of it is programs, patterns that you're running things through. You're looking for certain characteristics, within the actual network traffic. You're looking for actual characteristics. You're not just comparing to a list. Things like, is this serial number in the self-signed cert of the HTTPS certificate invalid? Or you're looking for things within the traffic that hey, that doesn't quite look right. So that's where the heuristics comes in. You have to weed things down before you open it up. If you open up every single one, like I said, you'll always be behind.
And so what gets opened up is determined through this heuristic.
Right, there's scoring that happens with any product. If it's on the list, then that's certain score. If the heuristics say it's bad, then that increments the score. So only what gets sent to the sandbox is stuff you essentially have never seen in the world before.
Yeah, so we've used that externally. We call it honeypot. I don't know if this differs.
Honeypot's a little different, yeah.
Where we open particular ports only, so we see a bad actor come in, do something to the SQL Server injection attack.
Right,
And we know to block that IP in terms of take them off for 30 minutes and make sure
yeah.
it's not coming in. But we're doing that for very specific ports, and we're doing that externally. I'm trying to picture how you do that on an internal network without actually interfering with legitimate traffic.
See, most of the malware is coming in through the application. It's coming in through an email. Look what happened to RSA, secure tokens. Most people have those little RSA tokens. That came in through an Excel spreadsheet, that somebody just happened to open up. It said, here's today's yearly numbers. So it's coming in through the application layer. It's not coming, what you're talking about are ports and protocols to reroute things. It's coming in through emails, Java, ActiveX, Word documents. I've seen a large amount of increase in malware and Outlook vCards. So we're also seeing a large increase in steganography. This is old school hacking stuff, but steganography is hiding an executable behind a picture or behind a song. So people are sending out pictures of their baby and it's got infected stuff behind it. So the methodology you're talking about is going back to kind of working with World War I tools. You got to kind of be advanced and use the tools you have today.
Any other questions from the audience?
I guess, I'd like to add, there's a couple different approaches to, of course, handling this. And one of the ways, of course, we see is whitelisting, okay? And whitelisting as far as, particularly on embedded devices. Because embedded devices, unlike, of course, your standard devices, you never open an email or some such, right, in typical cases. So it's a much more bounded, and you don't update it, so you don't have to worry about some user sitting there updating or downloading a bad picture or anything like that. So in that particular instance, at least with some of the station, that's not true of all, because we just heard an example where a CT has a PC on it, so that guy can go to a bad spot. And I think that's where certainly the other method is certainly appropriate for that. But in the case that you have a medical device that's bounded, you don't update it, then whitelisting is really what we would advocate as one way, because typically as well it doesn't use as much horsepower. AV we don't necessarily suggest for a medical device, because typically they don't have the horsepower to do that, and you have to keep the database updated and whatnot. So whitelisting would be akin to not going to China, right? Just don't go there, right?
So can you define whitelisting?
Okay, what whitelisting does is you have a list of known, for example, when the manufacturer develops and has his golden list. He has a golden list of DLLs in Windows case that he says that are able to run, execute. Okay, anything else we don't execute. So if you have another piece of code out there, it's not executed. And you actually,
Define, I'm sorry to keep doing this,
No,
but I
yeah.
don't know that everybody is hardcore technical. So in whitelisting, you basically identify specific processes that you feel the device can and should run.
Well, should run. Right now, you said this is the only ones you're going to let run. If anything else tries to run, or you don't let run. Right. So if you have malware has to usually start a process, or it has to attach itself to some code that a DLL that you already have. Right.
So
Well,
define a DLL.
Well, that's a dynamic link library. Let's just say a piece of code, a piece of the program, okay? So what happens is your malware can go in and actually try to change that program, so you'll actually think it's but if you actually encrypt that, so every time you start up, you actually have some sort of encryption or some sort of header that you say, oh, we're starting this piece of program or this process up. Let me make sure that it meets our criteria. We do some check, and then you start it. So that way, what happens is, again, embedded devices have the advantage that you don't update them. Only manufacturers come through and update them, right? So that's where whitelisting is a way that you can, at least address much of the problem. Not all of it, by many means. And I mean, you always have a layered approach to this, right? Because I think the recommendation earlier, with the sandboxing, I think is a good scheme. You have to also look at other ways, and this is one more layer that the device can take advantage of, updates.
So when you buy a device or a computer, right, it comes often with a bunch of DLLs or executable code that renders onto that device the ability to do certain things. Right? Now, that also renders onto the device vulnerabilities. So what Mike's suggesting whitelisting is, instead of having 50 DLLs, you might say, in order for this device to function, all you might need are these 3.
Well, I think moreover, I mean, certainly as you approach it, but what you basically say is all these DLLs, let's say all these programs, let's just say programs, as DLL, puts it to Microsoft, but it really could be just any Linux. These are the programs we're going to let run and no other program, right? So if any other program tries to kick off and tries to execute, it says, no, I'm not going to let you start. Okay, so in embedded devices, the reason that you can do that is they don't have somebody surfing the web, they don't have anybody opening pictures, they shouldn't do those kinds of things, right? Now, and so consequently that gives you a bounded set of programs that can run, and so you don't let the malware start, okay, essentially. And so that, again, we're doing one thing about security, and this is where I think everyone, as we start to address this, and I think what I wanted to mention before is you have a lot of tools out there to develop malware. I think as was suggested earlier, I mean, you and I can go out at Metasploit is a place that if you want to see how to generate one, even though that's for penetration testing, you could easily see it'll teach you everything you need to know to start some fundamental hacking. If that's your, that's your deal. Very fundamental. You can get going there and start, have a good time, and then, of course, you can advance. And it's a very nice, by the way, environment to do it, okay? I mean, there may be more better ones, but I think it's one of the best I see, right?
So we've talked about, identifying unknown vulnerabilities by input, unknown vulnerabilities in terms of malware. We talked about restricting, function on the device to only the things that the device needs to do to execute its healthcare function, and then restricting and not letting it do things that would not be relevant, like surfing the web and stuff like that. So we have a question here and then a question there.
All of my apps have now been consolidated down to hypervisors. In our case, it's VMware. And I want to know what I can do to proactively secure that hypervisor stack. Because we're not really protecting that code right now. Haven't really thought of it.
So can you just, when you say all of your apps have been, are you talking about?
So we've set up an internal cloud, and I've moved almost.
Manufacturer or?
No, we are a hospital system. Very large hospital system nationwide. And many, many care settings. All of our core advanced clinicals, all of our standard accounting systems, ADT, everything you can imagine I've got running, well, except for PACS systems, almost everything else is running on hypervisor stack, many hypervisor stacks. And I don't know how to secure that layer. I've talked to VM, they give me their perspective. I'm not confident that that's the only perspective I need to know. So
That whole realm has been changing dramatically, and several companies like Trend, who I work for, and other companies have come out with actually things that scan, they're agentless scanners against VMware stacks. But a lot of people think that just because they have virtual machines that they're safe. That virtual machine is going to act just like a physical machine. It's going to call out. It can get infected. It can do things like that. So there are scanners now that are coming out, and especially as VMware has recognized this, there's a partnership out with several companies that to secure virtual machines, to actually be able to sit on the virtual backplane and detect the traffic going in between devices on the virtual is really where that's going to now. And that's something that's been lacking behind, is detecting, because in old school you could pull a wire and see what's going on that wire. In a virtual environment, there is no wire. It's all going through the computer board, or what's called the backplane. And so now the availability is there to monitor the backplane, and so that's where you're going to have to go to.
Yeah, and if I might add, you have a lot of, I mean, and to that end, right, just as we know that, right? And we mentioned you can know that the hackers out there, writers, they do too. They look to see are they on a virtual machine or not, right? And they're going to say, you probably can't do that external, So let's see what we can do with you. So that's one of the things when you start to study this, you have to expect that there are going to be if I could say people out there that they're targeting. They're really trying. It's not just for fun. They're actually going out and they have whole design centers that's what they do, develop malware. And by the way, as I've always said to the audience that's here, just to drive it home, if I were a malware producer, I'd be a gamer. I would write a game, right? And part of my staff would be gamers, and part of my staff would be malware guys, right? And so because I'm going to get you to download that malware on your system, and I'm going to hope that I can get you to take it somewhere that I can jump onto the network, right?
Yep, and one of the things we talked about, about whitelisting, we do whitelisting for, like we said, websites, we whitelist things to like drives and things like that, but the problem is for healthcare organizations, we have residents, we have all kinds of folks coming in, so it's such the policy part of it, how do you, it's very intense to manage those white lists, and
That's an excellent question, and I don't know if you heard, I don't think you were here in the last session. But we talked about MDISS, why it exists, and what it contributes. And that's a perfect example of how emerging technology, we talked about the accelerating innovation, emerging technology, an emerging problem that is not unique to your healthcare system. Frankly, no one's asked that question before. Right? There's 6,000 hospitals out there. I don't know how many of them are using, a virtualized environment. Probably, a lot are increasingly. And so, I'll go away before we have a chance to talk. But one of the things that we do and what we're going to want to do with that question is actually throw it out to our network of healthcare organizations and then our companies and then come up with a policy statement and process and how to deal with that.
Well, I was a strategic enemy, and you've just taken all of this distributed systems and consolidated down onto 5 stacks.
Yeah.
And you can bring in an entire hospital system by figuring out one bug, target one system like anywhere. That would be a good strategy.
Yeah.
Not the application, but the I said, we got everything on all the eggs in one basket.
Right, but it's a good point, right?
How you feel like, how you feel so good about that.
Saves a lot of money. I don't cost it all. What's it up? I just got to do the extra layer of security.
Okay, and it's, virtualization, that's why sometimes it's actually, it's hard to see that it's a safe thing, because like I said, you can attack, you have another layer that interacts with what's that being established system. Right, I think in this, came with some guidelines a couple of years ago that shows some of these things, I think it's 800, 125, right, for virtualization. But
Yeah, well, I think the design for security, I mean, is what you're addressing, right? And I think some of the knowledge and making sure you don't have extra processes running, make sure, those are all things. And by the way, I think as time goes on, the device manufacturers, again, hooking up into a network is, I don't say new, but it's relatively new in this field, right? And so I think those are great, that practices, great practices.
A question and then a question.
Just getting back to the ratings question, because I think, I mean, a lot of the stuff we talked about are kind of network-based attacks, but on the, it seems that the bigger concern seems to be some of these emerging vulnerabilities due to like lower level like backdoors and things like the NFC and but I know that like the military has, because I sit in the military and I wasn't a security expert on it, but I know there's various ratings and one of the pieces like that the VA requires for like the FIPS certification, there's different levels, like level 2, 3, 4, etc. And but I know some of them deal with tamper detection and countermeasures and but there's this sort of rating system, this specification exists, but it'd be nice to translate that to a rating system like what gentleman here was asking about it. Is anybody working on that?
Yeah. Sorry about the microphone stuff. Hopefully you're picking stuff up in the ether. But so yes, we're in fact interested in working on a rating system, but we're not really talking about it explicitly because it's 2 or 3 steps downstream. So we talk about developing up the medical device, conceptual security framework. So what's it look like? We look at the life cycle of a device from a concept to retirement, through that life cycle. And then you look at it from the silicon atom on up to a fully integrated device. We should be able to come up with a robust security framework that includes things like virtualization. That hasn't been done yet. And so frankly, we struggle with that. What's the best way to approach it? Sometimes a trivial problem. We've got smart people, we've got lots of people. We banged at it over the last 12 months and 2 or 3 or 4 different times. We get closer, then we kind of pull back. So what we're really working on now is we take a step back, we look at all the standards that are out there that we think are most relevant. And we're looking at the standards in industrial control systems and the standards in healthcare. And we're also categorizing devices, because mechanical devices are different than a voltage-dominant accelerator. Right? And things that give off radiation are different than things that infuse. Things that are used in the ICU are different than things that are used at home. So we're trying to come up with categories and ways of categorizing devices, across this life cycle, across the different components. And so we're taking a step back now, looking at standards. Now we're going to summarize the relevant standards, relevant controls that are out there for security, and then go back and hit that framework again. Now once we do those 2 things, then rating starts to make sense. Okay? And so, again, we're a public health organization, so how do we have impact? Well, we can have impact most acutely through procurement. The standards are going to take 3 to 5 years. Guidelines and regulations, I mean, who wants those if we can avoid them? So how do we get procurement, positive to justice? So we're focusing on a set of requirements, even though we don't have the full conceptual framework done. And those requirements are based on what people have done historically in industrial control systems and in healthcare. And then, so the notion of a rating, we feel if we're going to be deliberate, just don't throw our ratings to come out tomorrow. So we think that that's probably some months away, but we're interested in it. And it's good feedback to get from folks that people would be interested in it. There are probably components of a rating system we can do earlier rather than later. Maybe not full-blown rating system, maybe something more that says, what has an organization done to harden their device, things like that. So some interesting ideas.
My small point was that aside from the network security, that the military already has some of these specifications for devices that for different levels of hardening, and maybe some of that could be sort of folded into the emerging rating system.
Good suggestion. We work with the DoD, closely, and so I can actually ask them that question. They're very interested in this because they deal with exactly what we're dealing with. So whatever they have in terms of what you're talking about, it hasn't been pushed into the medical device arena because they're regulated. And so the fact that they're regulated by the FDA, you can't really change them. You can't change that. So those types of things we have to advance. If you're talking about something inside a device, we would have to get it into design cycles of medical devices. But we're working with the DoD.
Hi, my name is Howard Saft. I'm a clinician researcher at the VA in Los Angeles. And This may be a little basic of a question, but if I'm working in the behavioral health realm and mHealth and have working to develop a prototype that may have a kind of a network or web, and then a mobile app, and then maybe potentially a Bluetooth connection, is there any kind of, and I know the VA with their PTSD app and all the other out of Stanford have really made a lot of headway in that area, but is there any, for me, is there any kind of a basic guidance? Like, how do I go about doing this? Because I want to build something, a working prototype that's good. And the prototype is usually a limited budget, but what's the stepwise approach? Where do you go?
Clinicians in the audience. So I think it's great that we have clinicians in the audience because, again, it's important. We're not just connecting inside the organization with the IT staff, with the security staff, with the clinical engineering staff. We've actually, in an incremental way, branched out to the chief medical information officers, who are now that gateway, if you will, between the hard technology folks and the clinicians, or the clinical staff, and the chief risk officer. And we spoke to Joint Commission, long answer to your question. We spoke to Joint Commission about what they're looking at in this arena. Their response was, at this point, and they actually hired someone on in the last 12 or 18 months that is an engineer, clinical engineer, who reports to the chief medical officer. So Joint Commission is, what they said is they are not prescriptive, they're interested in the area, they feel their general language that are there right now is sufficient. Major point is good to have a clinician worrying about this because this is a clinical problem. It's a public health issue. The reason this is important is because this has potential impact on patient care. Now, the simple answer to your question is, talk to Randy before you leave. Seriously, because I can't give you a list of 5 things you need to do, but you've got the head of field security sitting at the table. And so what he's going to do is probably hook you up with David Pettit, who's the chief clinical engineer, or maybe one of the security staff in the Bay. You're in Los Angeles, right? I don't know if he goes down to LA. But you're in an organization that has really deep expertise in this, and it's co-founder and leader in this consortium. You're lucky.
Actually, you bring up a very interesting point I never thought about. You know, we have to have a JCO. If we provide care, we have to have the clinics, approved in the hospitals, et cetera. You understand the JCO process. But I never thought about, though, is that if we're taking mHealth out of the clinical environment, but yet still using it as a clinical tool, what is JCO's rules or regulations are all providing a healthcare service, not in that healthcare system?
Because it's beyond the borders of the hospital.
Exactly.
It's not environment of care.
Right. So if it's beyond,
It's not an environment of care outside. It's not-
but so if it's still used for for care, but it's not yet in a facility of care, they're still okay with it then?
Like EMS,
Okay,
ambulance, it's sort of
okay.
the same line.
Yeah, but they get certified, they do, yeah, JCO does home health.
So,
Okay.
but what you bring up is an important point. And when we look at the issue of mobile health, we look at it in the context of 2.5 environments. The healthcare enterprise, because regardless of whether that's in a hospital setting or an ambulatory setting, the infrastructure is professionally designed and run. And then you have, so a device that's running on those networks is in a professionally managed environment. You can have the same device and it can all of a sudden be running in a home environment. And that network has nothing to do with professionally designed and run network, but it may be the same device. And then the half piece of this is the fact that you've got mobile devices and mobile applications that really manage and adjudicate the relationship of a patient as they transition between those 2 environments.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's kind of the way we are looking at mobile health from a security perspective and from a healthcare perspective. But this is all emerging, and this notion that the hospital is 4 walls is obsolete.
Oh, yeah.
Because we do essentially what used to be acute care or almost ICU level monitoring just by having someone walk around with a bandage on their chest.
I heard the best thing when I was here. They said the future hospital will have an emergency department, an OR, and ICU, period. And all the, no beds, step-down unit, ICU, and then that's it,
I just have one question. So, one challenge actually to you guys, because I think you're doing an excellent job, have for a number of years, in device certification for medical purposes. I would challenge that one of the things we have to get to as well is two things. Number one, supplying us information or having someone supply us information on supply chain contingency. I don't know if we get in a strategic situation with another country that I will be able to service and replace my equipment because there might be one microprocessor in there that's not functional. And that really would go into my purchase decision from a risk assessment perspective. Second, also cloud environment. I'm not sure what cloud environment. If we do iterations on network fail testing, we go to the tertiary level, and then we say, oh, well, in a tertiary scenario, the data is transiting to data center in Guatemala, and we didn't know that. And all of a sudden, now we have e-discovery and subpoena questions about if that data center is residing, if that data is residing on that server. Even the cloud provider never really necessarily did that kind of simulation to know that it's residing. And then the other one would be, I know Haptique is getting into this field, iMedical apps. They're saying, look, these are good mHealth apps, bad mHealth apps to download on your iPhone. And they have some kind of certification criteria that they're starting to adapt. And I guess my question would be, do you guys have some kind of long-term roadmap of getting into that realm? The reason I bring it up is I was at a big data conference last week, and one of the analytics partners is getting approached by an offshore company who really wants to use mHealth data analytics to start targeting offshore pharmacy to everybody. So if you're getting on there, you're doing your own, you're basically diagnosing yourself on your phone and you're getting that information. Now they can target you offshore pharmaceuticals, and maybe you won't even go to the doctor. So these are the types of things that we're looking for.
So like rating certifications been discussed and it's on the radar screen. And it's an issue that relates somewhat to capability. It's not trivial to set a certification framework and then process. Also, again, going back to wanting to be both sort of quick and robust and deliberate. And we want to do this with all the stakeholders at the same time. So it's on the radar. And we take those first steps. If we're still struggling with getting that sort of conceptual framework built and done. But the issues that you're bringing up are the exact reasons why it's critical we have a robust framework. Otherwise, we're going to miss things, right? Otherwise, we'll be in places like this, and someone like you will stand up and say, hey, what about our virtualized environment? Hey, what about offshore components? And what about offshore cloud-related storage? And then we add that. But we shouldn't be doing this in an ad hoc way, right? And Andy wrote that stuff down, and we're going to be dealing with it. But as we get better, we want that framework, and then we can iterate that framework, and we can address it, and then we can deal with rating and certification. I think, does that make sense? Absolutely. Apps are easier to deal with, and I think what Haptique is doing is interesting, both in terms of that and their RX platform. I don't know all the details on it, but the concept is interesting. We were talking the last session about the fact that there are about 300 to 500 apps per month coming out in healthcare. How do you possibly vet those? And then, one of the things that we talked about at this mobile health conference 3 weeks ago in San Diego, I was the chair for the healthcare track. Invited Brad, he backed out at the last minute. but one of the things that we talked about was I lost my train of thought. The apps, the formularies. Oh, it's more important to have a formulary for an app than it is for therapeutics. I think, because therapeutics have to be interoperable. Right? Apps have to be interoperable. So if you're ever going to have a formulary, healthcare systems should say, we're going to only have apps that do these things. If there's 300 to 500 or 3,000 to 5,000 new apps per year, let's have a formulary where you've got some basic criteria. And I don't know if that has done it yet, but there might be good apps, there might be bad apps. I don't know what their criteria are, but even if you have a good app, you better have metadata on that app so you know that you're bringing, water-based apps together, not water or oil-based apps together.
I just want to bring up, and Dale can speak to this more, but Dale and I were at a conference a couple weeks ago. This area of mobile apps is critical, but I'm interested in the healthcare systems that are here. Are you guys adopting mobile apps? And if you are you certifying them in some way as good apps before you allow your clinicians to use them? Because, it's a huge space. Just because someone builds what they call a medical device app, throws it up on a mobile management system, who says it's a good app that provides good care or good diagnostics capability?
That's what HapKeep is starting to try to do.
Right.
Now, iMedical Apps, right, does reviews, but they're starting to get into the same business, I think, of rating apps too, I think, shortly.
Just to comment on that. I mean, there's new NIH is sponsoring research and research methods to try to get the evidence around the apps
Now, think
Right.
about that. How long does it take to do research on something? And then 3,000 to 5,000 per year. I mean, go on, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. Just spending the weekend with the NIH Mobile Health Training Institute and learning the research methods there, trying to bring my background to that. And there are some other types of research methods than doing the randomized controlled trial that can really start to build the evidence. It may not. It just depends on the situation. So they're just.
And how long does it take? But it's still going to take you time and resources to do it. You have to recruit. You've got to verify data.
I'll push back. I mean, yeah, it does, and I think as someone, sometimes getting the fund, writing the grants, and kind of revising it and getting the grants is a big chunk of that time. But depending on the study design, there are different study designs that are shorter. So you could probably do even 6 months or so, depending on the issue. Depending on the type and the evidence that's needed to have the quality. It just depends on the whole situation. But
So that's critical, right? The more evidence is good. We should all be practicing evidence-based medicine. The challenge is, how do you possibly do studies on 3,000 to 5,000? You imagine 3,000 to 5,000 new drugs came out in a year.
yeah.
And I'm not, obviously it's not a full-blown clinical trial, but 3,000 to 5,000 different apps is tough.
Yeah, I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, well, drugs have to spend, not just they have to develop the drug, but they also have to spend, what is it, $800 million, something like a lot of money to do the evidence around it. Maybe just pushing some of the resources around the whole product is investing in developing the evidence around it too.
No, this is like, by the way, we agree. We agree that, it's important to have the evidence developed, but I'm just identifying a challenge in terms of the amount of resources it would take to really cover what's coming out. It's a little bit analogous to the nutraceutical arena, where these apps are not really like pharmaceuticals that are regulated. These apps are more like a nutritional supplement that can be pushed out there. And so it's a challenge.
And that's actually
Just another question or two, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
And that's another thing, issue that I was going to bring up. It depends on what the app's supposed to do. If it's just doing measurement of body, et cetera, but it's not going to be used for diagnosis or for prevention or for treatment, there's less of the rigor. So there may be 300 to 500 coming out, but they're tiered, just like they are with the devices. And the importance of the rigor in the study depends on what it's intended to really do.
Absolutely. Good point.
You don't want to study an app that's going to be dead in 2 months. It's got to have some critical mass and some, foothold, or else it's a total waste of time.
So we're all saying similar things. I'm suggesting that it's a new problem. We didn't have this problem three years ago. And the facility with which apps come out present us with the need to identify the criteria that would triage these apps and then spend the resources on those apps. And maybe there's a bunch that don't ever get considered because you can't do the evidence for it. It's an interesting kind of problem. So let's just identify who's got a question. Any other questions before? Third question. Anyone else? Okay, let's go through those 3 questions. We'll go left to right.
Okay, to answer your question, right, we have hundreds, maybe apps coming out. My take is one way you can help is quite honestly to make your requirements be open. Put the use cases out there, put the requirements out there, and put the test cases out there.
For the apps you mean?
For the apps and the kind of interfaces. I mean, if it's out there and you educate people, you can also have some level of self-certification before they even come in for testing. It does work well. I've worked in IT, I've worked the cable industry. Having those openness and open specifications can help because if something is, when it's out there, they can test and self-certify at least to know they meet those basic requirements. You can also, if something goes wrong, you know that there's an error in your expectations or you need more,
Yeah, that's a great question, and you've hit on one of the subtle points of fuzzing is that in traditional QA, you send the input, you look to see if the right thing happened, it's a yes or no answer. In fuzzing, you're sending a bad input, and you're looking to see if your target's still healthy or not, and what healthy means is sometimes ambiguous. So a crash is a clear failure, but there are more subtle failures that are harder to detect.
And one of those, it might be, as it's failing or going, starting to mess up, it might be sending quality outputs to the next device in the scheme.
That's why in the laboratory you should replicate to the extent possible your live environment so you can see if there's a cascading downstream effect. One more question.
So what we've been talking about, sort of the securities within the risk-based assessment of what that app's supposed to do, and whether the device itself, whatever its intended use is. Could you comment, part of the, if you're doing software for a true medical device that's got to get FDA clearance or approval, we need to meet IDC 62304. So where are the holes in that approach based on what we saw here? I mean, I had a nice eye-opening, the risk-based analysis needs to be broadened pretty significantly in my own mind. But where are the holes in 62304 that don't cover some of the fuzzy testing and some of the trying to assess the unknowns that we don't know about?
I don't have a direct answer other than talk to us for about 6 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll give you a card. We're working through, this is that pulling the standards together, doing some mapping, and putting together an easily accessible sort of hook into those things. So we're looking at 80,001, 853, 866. We're looking at computer language from Homeland Security for ICS, industrial control systems. So we're pulling that together and trying to. And what we notice is that when we get a group of people in a room and on telephone and we're having a conversation, that it's not easy. It's not like everyone's talking about, let's do some addition, let's talk about 2 plus 2. And so what we want to do is take these things and create a mechanism to harmonize everyone's understanding and everyone's ability to converse on it.
But to that end, I mean, I think it's critical that your group starts with basically an objective of that device. And if it's not risk-based, right, I mean, I think we all agree that if it's life-supporting, it's got to have a different level of rigor than a wellness app that kind of, if it's got false positives or false negatives, nobody really gets hurt. And so your structure's got to address, in my opinion, up front, a risk-based analysis of those things that are really cause harm for either false positive type 1 or type 2 errors, and then those that are moderate and those things that are much less, more inert.
Absolutely. That's why earlier we talked about the effort we're doing to categorize devices. And that categorization goes with some of the attributes that would be included in a categorization schema, which is interesting. It's been interesting to try to do that in the context of this conceptual framework for security.
I got one last yes or no question. Okay, so these app makers out there that say it's not a doctor, it's not a hospital, it's just me in my garage making the app, you're putting in all your medical information into my app. I would, yes or no, would I be a HIPAA-covered entity? No, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a hospital. And therefore, I can sell your stuff you're giving me all day, right? The pharmaceuticals, anybody else who wants a CRM unit, right? Is this all a fair assumption? Because I'm not a covered entity. I'm just a guy in the garage.
But an individual has voluntarily given input to you. How is it different than being posted on the website?
If you post it to Kaiser's website and our website, we're covered entity. We have a responsibility fiduciary interest to cover that data as defined by HIPAA. But if it's just me collecting data on my server because I have a cool app that's helping you heal, I can sell it to anybody I want.
So that's a great question. And for these are the types of things that as a consortium, what we can do, one thing that I explained in the last session is that we have 4 basic pillars in terms of the way we execute work. One is around education. So there's no curriculum on medical device security today. So we're working to build that curriculum, and it's going to be bound to and reflected in back and forth with that conceptual framework. We're working with, we're trying to formalize, we've agreed to work with ISSA on curriculum and programs that will be diffused across its security professionals. The second piece is, after procurement documents and procurement requirements. It's also important. So we developed a way that a healthcare system can express its requirements, audit its capability, and so on and so forth. And then the last is rapid solution development. So the types of things you're calling up are things that we could take to the rapid solution development concept, push out to the network, get feedback from people fairly quickly, across the country, both from the healthcare systems and from the industry members, manufacturers and technology companies, and come back and say, hey, end this policy statement, and push that out very quickly. That's a really important hole, I think, that exists. I want to go back and verify how OCR looks at it and how FDA looks at it, but I think you probably identified another hole. Are there any others? By the way, that's like number 4.
I'm going to write a book. I don't know. But we've got all kinds of stuff that keeps me up.
Right. And so, and again, it's a
It's not even my job. I'm not even security, but I do solution development and innovation for our ACO.
Oh, so that's right. You do
Transition.
Okay.
Just one comment about HIPAA. HIPAA was designed 10, 12 years ago when mobile health wasn't even, in the landscape. And so, it was actually one of the meetings here where there were several there were several representatives that are going to be addressing, HHS is going to be addressing those components of HIPAA and how that needs to be revised to address the mHealth devices, et cetera. So they recognize that was built on a 10, 12 years ago that didn't have this. So there are active, so when you say you're going to reach out to them, just keep in mind that they're active efforts that you might be able to tee into.
Makes sense. And so I think this is a really interesting observation that a lot of the questions that are coming here are coming from the people that are responsible for delivering care or developing services, and not from the IT folks and security folks. And that's why it's a consortium. And it's interesting. I'm a clinician by training, and I'm a public health guy by training. And so it's really great to have clinicians and service delivery folks at the table because, the IT folks or technical folks don't necessarily know the business cases. And technology without business cases is really actually kind of the formula for disaster. And we're kind of over time. And he wants to go home, that's what the rest of us here. So, very last question.
Well, it was
your time.
I don't know if this is relevant, but we're talking about mobile health, and so you could keep GPS. Hey, here, take my app. Let me track where you're going, track your exercise, track all these things, and we can help improve your behavior with that. But then, what piece of that is actually would be go to the EHR? Because you don't really want to send. Where you went to the wrong place. I mean, how do we, are there ways to kind of separate that out between, hey, maybe I want to send to my EHR that I ran, I walked these many steps over the past week, but not my GPS location, and to maybe distinguish between what, we're just keeping that all out under EHR in a separate secure issue place, separate from government entities and people getting upset about
Great
it.
question. Maybe out of scope of security, but what people basically say, I'll answer it. What people basically say is that that type of data, user-generated data, will generally speaking not be pushed into the EHR because of quality-related issues. Now, as more and more of that data becomes available, and as more and more of these apps come out, there will be evolution on how that works. But EHRs are still like embryonic. But you can imagine 2 years down the line that will evolve, and I have to suspect that they'll figure out ways to start to leverage that data without including the EHR.
But as a clinician, when I'm getting bombarded with these different for home monitoring devices that we're giving you, et cetera, so it's not take and enter. One of the biggest challenges that we have is all this data is coming in, blood pressure checks over time, what to filter and what to put in the
Absolutely.
medical
So
record.
that's a problem within the healthcare system. It's an additional problem, the data that's coming from outside the healthcare system. And there's going to be ways using, it's just a matter of data use, right? And then they're going to come up with ways to rating the data, to audit the data, who generated the data, keep it in different data stores, and they won't let it overlap, and a clinician will be able to view it. Many companies will deal with that. Okay, let me thanks everyone. If you have other questions, please down, please do. So I'll let you know.
Very good.